Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into my first top starts and sits for this fantasy football season. Week one is here. Kicks off tomorrow night. We got the Friday night game, Sunday games, Monday night wrapping up with the 49ers and Jets. I cannot wait. This past weekend of college football got me so excited that it's finally here. So yeah, let me just go ahead and dive right into this video. This video format is going to be how it's been for me over the last few years, where you're going to get my top two starts and sits at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. And as I always say too, in the last couple years, I take these names and I put them into my daily lineup. So this isn't just for your seasonal leagues. I think you can factor in these names into your daily lineups, whether you play on Underdog, FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever you play on. I think you can factor these names in if you want to put them in your lineup or if you want to hold them out of your lineup. With that being said, as I always do, I'm going to start with the quarterback position. My top starts, I do wonder if both of these quarterbacks are going to get to the point this season where I don't need to tell you guys to start them. But yeah, my top start of the week, I am going to go with CJ Stroud in his second year against the Colts on the road. I definitely like this matchup because the Colts have a young secondary right now. As they have question marks at the cornerback position outside of Kenny Moore. They have a question mark at the opposite safety side outside of Blackman. And then when you look at what CJ Stroud did in the two games last year against this Colts defense, which is the same defense, the same defensive scheme underneath Gus Bradley, he threw for at least 250 passing yards, and he had two touchdowns in each of those games. So that's why I really do like CJ Stroud in Week One. My other one, I like Jordan Love this week, Friday, down there in this Brazil game on Friday night. Mainly just because the Eagles, we saw how bad they struggled last year. Yes, they did bring in a lot of new pieces. They hired Vic Fangio as their new defensive coordinator, but that's actually why I like it more. Not because of Vic Fangio, just because this is a new defensive scheme with new players. So with it being the Week One matchup, you could potentially see communication issues, which could lead to broken down coverages. And then when you talk about this Packers passing attack, which has a plethora of wide receivers and tight ends for Jordan Love to throw the ball to, I can see him starting off his second year as a full-time starter with a great game and potentially getting on an MVP run this season. My top sits. These are names you're probably like, wow, why should I sit Joe Burrow, right, against the Patriots, who are supposed to be arguably maybe the worst team in the NFL this year? Well, my main thing why I have Joe Burrow here is because of the potential game script. I think personally the Bengals are going to blow out the Patriots. So let's just say if Joe Burrow does not get like two or three touchdowns in the first half, what happens if their defense picks off Jacoby Brissett or forces fumbles and they recover a couple touchdowns? They score a couple defensive touchdowns, and then all of a sudden it's the third quarter, they're up like 24-7. They have a 3 touchdown lead. Well, what that's going to do is the Cincinnati offense is going to go more run heavy to finish out the game, and Joe Burrow is not going to have enough opportunities to put up points. Now, if you drafted Joe Burrow, you're going to play him. I understand that. So as I always say, I would just temper your expectations with Joe Burrow this week. Not because, the Patriots, they still got good pieces on their defense, but more just because I just see this game script going where they're not going to be passing the ball a lot in the second half of the game. So Joe Burrow is a guy I'm not going to play in my daily lineups. I think you would definitely play him in your seasonal lineups because you drafted him as your top quarterback, but I would just temper your expectations if you do. Aaron Rodgers against the 49ers, I don't really have high expectations for this 49ers defense because of all the pieces in their secondary right now, which I think are questionable. But it's just because this is the first game. Aaron Rodgers is back from an Achilles injury. What if that happens again? Unfortunately, what if he does hurt himself again? The 49ers defensive line is still a great defensive line that can get after him. So with Rodgers, I just kind of want to see it at least through Week One before I would slide him into any of my lineups. So yeah, those are my top starts and sits for the quarterback position. Moving into the running back position, a guy that I think is going to reclaim himself as one of the best backs in the NFL this year, and I think he's going to have a great game on Sunday. Sunday is going to be Jonathan Taylor against the Texans. When you look at what Jonathan Taylor has done against Houston in his career, the last game of last year in that Week 18 matchup, he ran for 188 rushing yards. It's the same defense, the same defensive scheme, the same head coach, Shane Steichen, calling the offense, so I can see that happening again for him. Then when you look at throughout his career, he averages 135.2 rushing yards per game against Houston. And then in his last 4 games he's played the Texans, he's ran over at least 140 rushing yards. So that's why I expect JT to have a big game on Sunday. My other start, I'm going to go with Travis Etienne Jr. Against the Dolphins. The Dolphins are really banged up on their defense. They have people on the PUP list. I saw they had, I don't think they're all defensive players, but I saw they had like 13 players on their injury report, which I think are, but most of them are on the defense. But most of this is because this is a new defensive coordinator that's down there in Miami now. They lost they let Christian Wilkins walk in free agency. So they don't have their best defensive tackle right now. They have some solid linebackers there, but I think Miami's defense is going to be, before they are an actually like solid unit, I think it's going to be another month or so where you can take advantage of the running backs against them. And I think Travis Etienne Jr. is a sneaky play, especially in the daily lineups this week. My top sits, I usually do this on week 1 because again, if anybody's followed me over the last few years, I love to give stats, but I don't really like to look into the data until at least 4 games have been played and we got a better idea who these defenses are. I don't think you can really lean in too much of last year unless it's the same defensive coordinator that's pulling over from last year, whether it was a good or a bad matchup. So usually in week 1, what I try to do is avoid anybody that's in a running back by committee situation. So starting with Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler against the Giants, it sounded like before the season those two are going to be splitting the touches 50-50. So we don't really know who's going to end up dominating the touches between those two. And then I'm also factoring in, when you look at the Giants defense, they have a very good defensive front and a very good solid linebacker core that's led by Bobby Okereke. So I think that they are going to have a good front 7 where they can bottle up this rushing attack, and they're going to make Minnesota one-dimensional, and they're going to try to force Sam Darnold to beat them on Sunday. So that's why I really don't like having Aaron Jones or Ty Chandler in my lineup. My other one, I'm going with Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Kamani Vidal against the Raiders. The reason why is, again, it's a running back by committee. The defensive front for Las Vegas is going to be a lot better this year because that guy I just mentioned about that Miami let go. They have Christian Wilkins. And then the other reason why, too, is just, again, I think how we're going to see this, I kind of think at the beginning of the season, you're going to kind of see Gus Edwards probably get most of the shares. Depending on how J.K. Dobbins does, I think he's going to have the second most touches, and then you're going to see Kamani Vidal. But with how Jim Harbaugh loves to run the ball, I think he's going to go with a hot hand, depending on each week. And until we see how these touches are divvied up within that Los Angeles backfield, I'm just going to kind of stay away from that and just stash those players like I mentioned in my waiver wire video about J.K. Dobbins, to stash him going forward. Moving into my wide receiver position for the top starts and sits, my top one just carrying over C.J. Stroud's success from last year. I like Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell against the Colts this week. Everything what I said about C.J. Stroud applies to these 3 wide receivers, especially when you're going against a very inexperienced cornerback group outside of Kenny Moore that has a lot of question marks. All 3 of these guys could have a boom game, and that's why I would definitely put them into your lineup. Moving into the next set of wide receivers I like, I love Mike Evans and Chris Godwin against the Commanders. If you guys watched my waiver wire video, I talked up why I like Baker Mayfield this week. It's because they are going against a defensive secondary that has been revamped. It's new pieces. There's young players in that secondary that can lead to week 1 miscommunication where you can see broken down coverages. And I would not be surprised if this is one of those big boom games from Mike Evans, and we see kind of one of those classic Chris Godwin games against the Commanders here in Tampa on Sunday. My top sits. So if anybody knows me, they know I love year 3 wide receivers, and I have such a high expectations for George Pickens. I think he's going to have a phenomenal year. But if you happen to have a better option to play over George Pickens this week, I would just consider it. The reason why is just because the Steelers' offensive line's banged up, but I feel like Russell Wilson's going to be underneath pressure a lot this weekend. You're going to basically be betting on Pickens to get a lot of targets, but with them not acquiring Brandon Ayuk via a trade, know what Atlanta's defense is going to do? They're going to bracket coverage Pickens. He's going to see a lot of double teams. He's going to see a lot of eyes from the Atlanta secondary. So sure, he might get the targets, and that might end up paying off for you. But he might see a lot of targets, but he's going to have two Atlanta defenders on him for most of the game. So that's why I'm kind of shying away from him. But I'll be honest, there's one league I got to play him this week just because of I don't trust any of my other bench options over him. So if you do have him in your lineup, just temper your expectations. But as far as daily lineups, I think I would avoid Pickens this week and see how this offense is going to look with Arthur Smith in week 1. My other top sit, I'm going with that rookie wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Brian Thomas Jr. against the Dolphins, and it's strictly because of Jalen Ramsey. Now, I doubt Jalen Ramsey's going to shadow Brian Thomas and follow him all over the field, but with Christian Kirk working inside the slot for the Jacksonville Jaguars, it's going to either be Gabe Davis or Brian Thomas Jr. that's going to be lining up against Jalen Ramsey throughout the game. And it's a rookie in his first game, potentially getting most of his snaps against Jalen Ramsey in that defense. So I'm looking to avoid that. And now, if Brian Thomas Jr. lights up Jalen Ramsey on Sunday, then yeah, you'll be putting him in your lineups going forward. But I think he's a guy you want to just be patient with through this first month of the season. And then finally, moving into the lovely tight end position, my top star of the week, I am going to go with Luke Musgrave against the Eagles. I think he has a potential to really blow up and go over 100 receiving yards in this game. And the reason why is the Eagles linebacker core is not great. They are not good in coverage. They have Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean. Devin White has already been ruled out because of an ankle injury. So like I talked about with Jordan Love, with the new pieces in the secondary, right? They already have a lot to deal with all those wide receivers in Green Bay. So I think the wide receivers are going to open up things in the middle for Luke Musgrave to take advantage of. And I think he's going to have a very solid outing on Friday night down there in Brazil. Trey McBride against the Bills. I think this is a potential great boom spot for him this week, for him to have a ceiling outcome. If you guys aren't aware, Matt Milano, who got hurt last year, unfortunately got hurt during training camp. I think that was season ending, or he's out for a long time. Anyways, Matt Milano is one of the best coverage linebackers in the NFL. So the Bills don't have their best linebacker, and their new revamped secondary, kind of similar to the Eagles. Their new revamped secondary is going to have to keep their eyes on a Marvin Harrison Jr., a Greg Dortch, a Michael Wilson. So what that's going to do is that's going to leave opportunities for Trey McBride to go against these linebackers in Buffalo that aren't great in coverage. And he can potentially get to like 100 yards and a touchdown on Sunday. Moving into the sits, I'm going with Brock Bowers against the Chargers, mainly because he did miss practice on Monday. Now, it was reported today that Brock Bowers would be returning to practice. He has a foot injury, so I'm not going to really trust that, right? So, like, how many snaps is he going to get on Sunday? Michael Mayer, the tight end, he's in his third year, is there. How are those two going to split up the snaps and the target share between two tight ends? You got Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Do you trust that in week 1 in your lineup? So that's why, as much as I love the talent that Brock Bowers is, and there's a pathway for him to be a very good fantasy tight end as a rookie, I want to be patient with him, and especially considering the foot injury. I don't know how many snaps he's going to get on Sunday. So if I do have a better option out there to play over Bowers, I would definitely consider it. Now, Dalton Schultz against the Colts, right? You're wondering, like, Cody, you just told me to play CJ Stroud. You just told me to play their wide receivers. Why would I not play Dalton Schultz? I get it if you do. But that's my whole point why I put him at my sit, is there's so many passing options, right? You know Stephon Diggs is going to want his targets. Nico Collins deserves his targets. Tank Dell has that great chemistry with CJ Stroud. I'd expect those three to be the top 3 on targets on Sunday. So that leaves Dalton Schultz at 4. Maybe he gets the third targets. I don't really see him being in a situation where he's going to have the second most targets. Then that would be a viable option for you this week. So that is why I would just shy away from him right now. I would want to see how Dalton Schultz is going to be used in this offense now that they have 3 really good wide receivers down there in Houston before I play him. So yeah, that is my top starts and sits for week 1 of the NFL season. We're finally here. I hope you guys win your week 1 matchup so you can get your fantasy football season off to a great start. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit like button. If you have not followed me or subscribed to me on all my social media channels, make sure you do that. I am on X, YouTube, TikTok. You can even check out my Instagram if you want. There is a link tree on my X account if you want to see all my social media platforms to follow me on. As always, guys, you enjoy your day, your morning, your night, your evening, wherever you watch this. I'll be talking to you next Tuesday for my top waiver wire targets and streamable defenses. Peace out.